So, welcome everyone. We're going to be talking about Helen Frankenthaler today. And I'm using the opportunity of the show that's up at the New Britain Museum of American Art as an excuse to talk about Helen Frankenthaler. I mean, for crying out loud, I, I'm going to cover her whole career. The work that's up at the museum is really late work, um, and it's works on paper. It looks like a fantastic show from what I've been able to see of it online, and I definitely want to get up there to see it in person. Um, so this is a really great painter. She's somebody who is a wonderful colorist, um, and an innovator. Um, and as this little blurb says, she was eminent among second generation post-war American abstract painters and is widely credited for playing a pivotal role in the transition from abstract expressionism to color field painting. And we'll go into a lot more depth on what all that means. But what is the difference between abstract expressionism and color field painting? Um, you know, what what color what abstract expressionism really was about was a lot of it, a a brand of it, or a direction that it took, was very much about splattering paint, about very visceral approaches to the canvas, um, um, very emotional upheavals and things like that. That was one part of it. Although when you look at some of the people who are labeled as abstract expressionists, you look at somebody like Rothko, very contemplative, Barnett Newman, they're very austere and very contemplative pieces too. So there were different aspects to abstract expressionism, and Frankenthaler um, really took the aspect of the application of paint and color as her starting off point. I'm gonna go here, and here is Helen Frankenthaler in her studio. There are no rules. That is how art is born, how breakthroughs happen. Go against the rules or ignore the rules. That's what in invention is about. Okay, so basically what it comes down to is for her, the sheer physicality of putting on that paint is part of the experience. And let's see. Okay, and here is on the left, we've got Jackson Pollock splattering away. Um, uh, Helen Frankenthaler really was moved by certain aspects of what she saw in Pollock's work. On the right, you have dekooning, again, large volumes of paint, using the brush to move the stuff around and really get that vigorous surface, that paint surface going. What happened was, I'm going to step back a second and go into a little bit of history. Helen Frankenthaler was smart, Upper East Side, came from a well-to-do family. Father was a Superior Court New York State judge. Um, um, and she went to the Dalton School, which was a pretty progressive school, and studied with a really wonderful painter who I'll show some images of later, Rufino Tamayo, who was a Mexican painter, modernist. So she was exposed at a very early age to possibilities that were beyond realism, and really pursued that. Now she went to Bennington, and this lady had a lot of chutzpah. Basically, what it comes down to is her senior show at Bennington. Basically, they had a senior show of the entire class at Bennington, and she invited the entire. At that time, you could do that. Invited the entire avant-garde of New York to come up to Bennington to see the show, and she gets on the phone to Clement Greenberg, who is one of the preeminent critics of abstract expressionism at that time. And she invites him up. And he says, well, I'll only come up if there's booze. And she says, we have a budget for booze. So he comes, and they all come. And she walks him around, and they hit it off, and that's the beginning of a 5-year affair that she has with this very influential art critic, who introduced her to Jackson Pollock, and he brought her to Pollock's show, and she walked around it, and what was it that she said? She said she felt like she landed in Portugal and spoke no Portuguese, but she loved the place that she landed and wanted to know more about Portugal. So that's a paraphrase. It's not a direct quote, but basically that's the story. She landed in an unknown world and liked it. So basically, Greenberg got her out to the Springs, to Pollock's studio, and she actually saw him painting on the floor with the canvases unstretched, and him dancing around the canvas. And that really affected her. She saw the possibilities there. She had been, she set up her studio in New York, and she was painting away before this, but she, after the experience of seeing Pollock's studio, she went off to Nova Scotia. And when she came back, she laid out canvas on the floor of her studio and went to it. And this piece is a breakthrough piece. It's Mountains and Sea. And it's unprimed canvas. She just laid it out on the floor of the studio and went to it. It's oil paint, so it really, she just took the turpentine and mixed it in with the colors and just let it rip. And this was a real major breakthrough for her, and Greenberg saw it, and he was knocked out by what she had done with this idea. She was 23 years old at the time when she painted this piece. It's large scale. It's 7'2" by 9'9", so it's a big piece. So here is her process. She's in the studio. A really good picture looks as if it's happened all at once. it's an immediate image. For my own work, when a picture looks labored and overworked, and you can read in it, well, she did this, and then she did that, and then she did that. There's something in it that hasn't got to do with beautiful art for me. And I usually throw those out. I wish I had some of those. Though I think very often it takes 10 of those over-labored efforts to produce one really beautiful wrist motion that is synchronized with your head and your heart, and you have it. And therefore, it looks as if it were born in a minute. So this spontaneous soaking, staining, pouring, allowing the paint to flow on and into the fibers of the canvas. She's sponging it on, she's moving it around. She'll take brooms and shove the paint around. At this point, she's still working with oil paint. Okay, now I'm going to step back. Some of her influences. This is Arshile Gorky. She saw his work, and basically she was working in this sort of cubist, surrealist. It ain't a bad painting. You know, this piece on the left is her piece, and it's got really fresh color. Good composition, you know, it's a strong piece. And here again, Tamayo was her high school teacher, quite remarkable painter himself. And now on the right is an Arshile Gorky piece from later on in his life, actually toward the end of his life. And you can see his use of staining the canvas. And this is something which, you know, basically came out in her piece. She really didn't like the drip. The whole drip thing seemed limited to her. And in fact, you know, Pollock was moving on before his death from those all over drip paintings into some other imagery. But she moved on before he did. And these are a couple of pieces that came after Mountains and Sea. And they're very primal. There's, let's see, it's like primary source material, primal mind, kind of mud. You know, notice the handprint in Eden, in that upper kind of center quadrant. You can see that red handprint up there. This is very much stuff that was in the air at the time. Kind of, let's see. They're really, you know, all over painting in this, and they're not as stained. They're not quite as stained. These have some thicker paint on them than Mountains and Sea, but let's see. So this is stuff that was in the air at the time. They're the kind of symbolic images, kind of pre-verbal image, kind of Jungian collective unconscious business was kind of in the air and floating through the art circles. On the left is a piece by Adolf Gottlieb. You can see these kind of cryptic symbols on the bottom, and then you can actually see these cave paintings that are on the right. So there's this kind of seeking the source of imagery that is kind of a shamanic practice that doing this ritual practice of putting on paint is something which is very much part of what Pollock and what um, Frankenthaler was involved in getting her whole body into the paintings. What concerns me when I work is not whether a picture is a landscape or whether somebody sees a sunset in it. What concerns me, did I make a beautiful picture? Okay, and you can see there's a lot of different materials here: oil, enamel, charcoal, pencil. This one's on sized canvas, so it's not soaking in quite as much. She's always, experimenting, trying different things. This is still 59. We're back there. Now, Greenberg, they were still having their affair for that was going on for quite a while. He was in contact with some of these painters that were down in Washington, and he invited Morris Louis and Kenneth Noland, who were two painters who were kind of struggling to find their way in abstract language. He invited them up to see Mountains and Sea, because he thought that Helen was really onto something that these guys might benefit from. And as you can see, this Morris Louis piece, he's using staining, and that was straight out of the experience of going into her studio. Now it's of course it's different. He's taking it in a different direction, but nonetheless, he acknowledged her as this, the person who came up with the idea of pursuing this in this direction. Okay, and now we're getting up into 1960. And notice that now these are, she's starting to experiment with the medium, and she's the one on the right is really acrylic, and the one on the left is acrylic and oil mixed together in the same canvas. So there's it's a feed loop, because those folks down in DC were all working with acrylics, and basically Helen saw that and said, well, maybe I'll try the acrylics. Let's see what they can do. And you can see there's a saturation in the acrylics, that there's a more vibrance in the color. It doesn't soak in the same way as the oil paint. It stays more to the surface, where the oil paint seeped a lot deeper into the fibers of the canvas. By the way, beautiful paintings, great color. and substantial, substantial scale, which is something which plays into all this work. It's the scale of these big areas of color that kind of, when you're in the presence of these pieces, you get that. Let's see. So it's really, this rich color. The other aspect of using the oil paints on raw canvas is it's a conservator's nightmare. These paintings are going to rot the canvas. They don't, oil paint and cotton duct don't go well, or linen don't go well together. It kind of leaches out. It'll change color over time. It tends to rot the canvas if you use a lot of it. So the transition from oils into acrylic also increases the longevity and the stability of the paintings. though I don't know that that was her motivation at the time. I'm just saying. Okay. So now we're moving into Provincetown. Now, this is not her first experience with Provincetown. She actually, in 1950, went to Provincetown and studied with Hans Hofmann for a brief period of time, long enough to get the message about the push and pull of color, which I've talked about before. Basically, when you put two colors down next to each other, what do they do? You know, basically, warm colors tend to come forward, cool colors tend to recede, and the dynamic of them put down next to each other is a principle of painting that Hofmann espoused and brought from the modernist notions of Matisse and Picasso. So in I'm going to step back again. In 1958, Helen met Robert Motherwell, and they were married. Actually, they knew each other from New York City. They married in 1958, and Robert Motherwell, if you're not familiar with him, was one of the founders of the abstract expressionist movement. I believe he was 10 to 15 years older than her, but that didn't seem to be an inhibiting factor. He was one of the aesthetic theoreticians that really pushed abstract expressionism forward. And so they had a summer house out in Cape Cod. So a number of these pieces were done out there. They had a studio right on Commercial Street, right off the bay of the Cape in Provincetown, and they were quite the couple. I mean, two brilliant minds together, and they fed each other really creatively. Very different in their approaches, but there were enough similarities, so they really wove together. And I'm going to move on to show this again. You know, the sheer physicality of how she would get into these paintings and move them around. And here is a Robert Motherwell on the right. Good sized piece, you know, 72 by 48. And the name of the piece is Throw the Dice. And you know, on the left is a really wonderful. She did the series of pieces that were kind of window-like, though she would never, you know, she didn't like to restrict herself or say too much about the referential aspect. There's definitely an effect of being out there in Cape Cod that's got to get into the paint and into the paintings. And so here you can see the kind of parallel course that they're playing out now. You know, the one on the right is a Frankenthaler. The one on the left is a Motherwell. You can see how, you know, there's an affinity between them. But This is a series that Motherwell was involved in. He did over 200 of these elegies to the Spanish Republic pieces, and they were started back in '36, um, when the Spanish Revolution was taking place, and basically over 700,000 people died in that event. But the grief and the the violence of that precursor to World War II, the Nazis were trying out their war machine, and so these pieces grew out of that experience, out of trying to capture that tragedy. So again, this is a major difference between the abstract expressionist movement and this open color field painting that Helen Frankenthaler was embracing and pushing forward. Um, there's a sense of the tragic, the grief, the sense of loss and struggle of life and death in his thinking and how he's approaching these paintings. Um, and these are, again, they're large scale pieces. This is 82 by 114 inches. So it's, when you're in its presence, you're in the presence of something. And this is 1966. These kind of the ocean view, the P-town kind of presence is here, and that sense of buoyance, of movement. And again, the window to the sea, that kind of sunset through the window. I'm just saying, she wouldn't like me for saying this, but basically there is a referential aspect. It's not something that she emphasized. It's not something that's important in a certain way. The mood, the feel, our experience of this color, of the freshness of the mark making, of how those colors interact, that is the important thing. That's the point of these. She called herself an abstract painter. And there's this lovely piece, Bayside. And basically this is 67. So it's a really lovely atmospheric piece. Those changes in those blues, and the kind of hovering, the softness of some of the edges and the crispness of some of the edges of the big blue shape. It's almost like the fog drifting in off of the bay. And again, her relationship to the art scene in New York, her knowledge of Rothko. I mean, basically, this is somebody that whose work she would be very familiar with. And it wasn't that she was copying him, because she was definitely herself, but there's this softness of the edges. There's the color harmonies that she's playing around with, and that he's involved in, and the subtle kind of hovering presence that these paintings have.
Larry,
Yes.
somebody mentioned that Small's Paradise was a Harlem jazz club. Any relationship to the paintings?
I'm sure. she was somebody who was in the scene. So yes, I would say that's true. Um, and the relationship between jazz and the abstract expressionists is just, very well documented. These guys were listening to jazz all the time while they were painting their paintings, and even if they weren't, they were um, emulating the harmonic riffs that go on in the improvisational jazz. So yes, improvisation was very much a part of this approach. Um, you know, I think that Helen Frankenthaler played her paintings very well, and here she is playing her paintings. Align, color, shapes, spaces all do one thing for and within themselves, and yet do something else in relation to everything that is going on within the four sides of the canvas. The canvas surface is flat, and yet the space extends for miles. So, what's she saying here? Basically, there's this expansiveness to how she's approaching these paintings. There's this way it can spread out. Notice at the end of the middle shot that there's a bolt of canvas at the end there. If she needs this painting to go longer, she can just roll it out further and just keep painting. um, Not unlike Sam Gilliam, who actually did that, who rolled it out for 100 feet and just kept painting. So, this is this kind of expansiveness, this kind of improvisatory approach to putting on the paint, and to trying to keep that freshness and that touch, um, that delicacy, and that those interactions of forms. That's something that's very important to the work and this beauty. um, I'm going to spend a minute with this because I love this painting, and and there's a lot to see in it. So again, it's acrylic. It's 81 by 87 inches, so it's a substantial size. But there's this hovering quality to this painting, like she's breathing it onto the canvas. Um, I'm gonna do a close up on this because there's some things that I want you to see. So I'm gonna zoom in and go over here to begin with, and you can see where the edge of that blue and that beige meet, and the blue turns into this green because it's mixing with the yellow of that beige. And there's this line, this one little line in there that she drew into the painting, and it's kind of coalescing with the edge of that kind of veil of blue on the right. It's not quite touching it. It's leaving a little space in between, and when it comes through on the other side of that big blue space, it's it's touching the edge of the form. So I'm gonna lower this down like this, and you can see how this white has been flooded over the top of the underpainting, and it flows into that. I'm going to back off again. Let's see. It flows into that dark edge, and she leaves that sliver of the dark showing. And there's this one little line of this light where basically I believe that the blue was flooded underneath the beige, and she left that light line where it was bare canvas, and the beige went over that. Really interesting process. But you know, all that being said, look at this thing. It's just a beautiful piece. Okay. And there's this business that she's leaving these lines. She's leaving that space. She's leaving that light line in there. That's unpainted areas. And how did she get that? I mean, did she tape it? She may have taped it off. She may have folded the canvas in some way to make that crease in there. I don't know, but that linear element really breaks up the forms of the flow through this painting. Okay. So this is a big, moody piece. And you know, she wasn't resisting that. She'd go there if the call came. And you can see this kind of spiral business that's going on in the center of the piece. So, harbinger of what? Okay, and now, you know, there's a restless innovation in this lady. She's constantly moving forward. She's constantly looking for the next step. You know, this is an opaque watercolor on the left, and you know, basically just trying to see what she could do with that medium, trying to see what it would do for her. On the right is a monoprint, which, if any of you, well, you probably aren't familiar with it. What you do with a monoprint is you take a plate. It can be a piece of plexiglass, a piece of glass, or a metal plate, and you paint the ink on with solvent, and then place it in the press and run the press through. Now this is on handmade paper, so there's a lot of different things that are going on in the texture of the way it's reticulating and all that grainy texture is something which is probably part of the nature of the monoprint and part of the nature of the paper that it's being printed on. Okay, leprechaun. So, okay, somebody asked something about sense of humor and playfulness and how important that is. Well, this is a really funny piece. I mean, she had a sense of humor. She was impish. She was a leprechaun at times. You know, this piece is actually, you know, some of her later work. This is 1991, so she's getting up there. And in her later work, she was working with acrylic and mediums and getting thicker paint. She was trying to play the soft field of watered down color against thicker, more opaque areas of paint. And so you can kind of see, let's see, I'm gonna do a zoom in for this and go in here. And well, this print is not that good, but these pieces are, these areas of paint are, you know, really impastos that are kind of put on over the top. So it's thicker paint that's being put on, and some of it looks like, you know, she had gloves on and just smeared it on there with her fingers. And then you can see, you know, this this green is painted over the top, but dragged, and, you know, different kinds of brushwork worked in there to give you that kind of texture. Again, you know, there's this business going from this beautiful kind of lemon yellow down there in the right-hand lower corner, and then working into this bright orangey cadmium yellow that kind of floats up to the surface. And look at how the red kind of pushes back. And, you know, this is all playing off of this slab of green. So, you know, you've got this green field of color that's underneath it, and this slab of like really solid green down there. And then these other colors sort of float along the surface of that. Very interesting. Smart lady. Okay. And these are some of her later pieces, and these are some of the things that are like the works that are, I'm not saying they are in the show that's up in New Britain, but this is like the work that's up in New Britain. And these pieces are, you know, it's later work. You know, she's getting up there. She's in her 70s at this stage of the game, I would say. Let's see, you know, late 60s. Gets a little bit hard on the knees painting on the floor. So these pieces she would spread out on the table and work on a table, and you know, nonetheless get this wonderful layering quality out of it. And this piece is on a beautiful piece of handmade paper, as you can see over in the exposed part in the left-hand corner. Oh, if you have a question or something to say, please put it in the chat, and Joan can pass it on to me. Okay. And again, acrylic on paper, 22 by 30. Very subtle. There's a mature kind of assurance to these pieces. And, you know, one of the things that they focus on in the show up in New Britain is worth talking about at this point, which is basically, what is it when you become an older painter? Where is that at? You know, basically you don't have the physical wherewithal to do some of the things that you could in your youth, but you have that level of experience and those layers of years of accrued knowledge to apply to the thing. The speed may not be quite as fast, but the knowledge is there. And let's go. Again, another, you know, untitled but beautiful piece. And, you know, Russian River, she's no longer afraid to give us a referential thing. At by 1995, it's like, okay, yeah, it's fine. You know, there was a time when representational painting and abstract painting were kind of two different fields at war with each other. There was a belief that abstract painting was the direction, the evolution of modernism. And, you know, at a certain point, we kind of, this is kind of dropped away. And many artists work back and forth between abstraction and representation and kind of freely interact with imagery and just plain abstract painting and color for its expressive value. So,
Larry,
yes.
someone commented that they don't see any of her signatures on the paintings.
Oh, they're there. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there was one that was signed back there. Let's see. This doesn't have it. She signs many of these on the backs because there it is in the lower right-hand corner. It's barely visible, but it's there. And you can see it here. That's very clear. That's her signature. So it was there. She's not shy about signing her pieces, although she's discreet about it when it comes to disturbing the composition with a signature. She won't do that. She'll sign it on the back or something like that. But good question. Okay, now again, this is another piece. This is the one on the left is work on paper, 1997. So it's a late piece. The one on the right is actually a woodcut, and she did a lot of these. And this is 41 colors in this woodcut. So that's 41. Well, she probably would have been able to hand color some areas on different blocks, but that means it's 41 blocks, normally 41 plates. So she was working with a really, really wonderful printmaker, Ken Tyler Graphics, was in Bedford. I'm not sure if they're still there, but they had these great Japanese woodcut printmakers that came over and would assist in creating these woodcuts.
Again, please don't raise your hand. Just write your question in chat function, please. Just type it in.
Okay. And you know, this piece is just, it's very delightful. You know, there's a playful quality to this. Look at that, the way that kind of white is just drooled across the bottom of this piece. It's there, it works, it's fine, leave it alone. Okay, and you know, again, this one is playing these washes against these solid, more opaque areas of color.
Larry,
Yes.
somebody knows about the Tyler Graphics. It's no longer in Mount Kisco. It's an auto dealership now.
Okay, there you go. And this again is you know, it's a wonderful piece. You know, the combination of the kind of squeegeed on paint and stain on the canvas underneath is a really interesting effect and something that she, you know, developed. And this one's a really beautiful piece too, and very late. It's 2002. And the referential stuff, like I said, she's no longer afraid to do cloudburst. This piece is supposedly the last piece that she worked on. It's a woodcut. The layering is so delicate, very beautiful. These black lines activate this kind of tenuous quality to these black lines through it. And you know, hey, it's she died in 2011. I'm just saying, don't know what those black lines are about, but it says something to me about her trying to deal with certain issues that we all try to deal with in our own ways. So Weeping Crabapple. And, you know, personally, I think, you know, we all may be able to get up to the New Britain Museum of American Art fairly soon. I've had my second shot, so I'm thinking of it. The show is going to be on through May 23rd. I've given you a bunch of YouTubes. There's tons of stuff out there on her. And I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. I've had a great time living with Helen Frankenthaler for the last week.
And you know, Larry, I love her. Some of those images I would just love to have where I live. I would love to live with them. So anyway, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Larry.
Yes.
Please go to our website if you have any desire to see the programs coming up. As I said, we're having a program Monday morning, and Monday night. And then again, Thursday, the 25th, the concert from Lincoln Center and the flowers from Korea. So I hope you will all join us for those programs. People were very happy about everything, Larry. Lots of compliments. So we hope to see you again. And next Friday, we forgot to discuss next Friday.
Jeez. Are we doing, we're either doing Monet. Yeah, I think we're doing Monet next week.
Okay.
There's a show up in Boston. So basically, I'm transitioning from Helen Frankenthaler into another field of color.
I like color in paintings.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you all.